Hello, everybody. Welcome to Navel Gazing, the Valley Indy podcast. My name is Eugene Driscoll, and I've returned after a long absence, at least since the great give of early May. I have an interesting, I hope, informative program scheduled for you today, thanks to my two guests. You see, joining me is Mr. John Marini, the Corporation Counsel for the City of Ansonia.
Eugene, thank you for having us on. The Howard Stern of Hyper Local News.
Don't get me canceled, Marini. All right. And then also, I'm really excited to introduce the person that really runs Ansonia, the person behind the person, making her debut appearance on the Navel Gazing podcast, Rhonda Perini. Hi, Rhonda.
Hi, how are you?
I am great. Thank you so much for joining us. This is a pleasant surprise. What's your title with the City of Ansonia, Rhonda?
The land use administrator and also the CEO.
Okay. So what's a land use administrator do?
Basically oversees the building department and zoning, blight, regulations, works with the commissions.
And you're sort of, when I listen to a Ansonia planning and zoning meeting, there are two people that stand out as sort of the experts in the room. Not that P&Z members aren't experts, but they're laymen, right? Those are volunteers,
Right.
And then they're guided through the very complicated issues of land use and land use regulations and what to change and what not to change. You have yourself, and then the second name, whose name escapes me at the moment. This is very embarrassing, but he's the planner, right?
David Elder.
David Elder. Yes, the two of you. So you guys are like the professional staff that counsel and guide the P&Z through their meetings. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
And more than that. So, Ansonia has a lot of land use functions, as all cities do: planning and zoning, zoning board of appeals, inland wetlands. There's the whole blight element, all the building inspectors, right? So all of that we kind of put under the umbrella of building. Rhonda is essentially the hub, right? The center of all of that, the administrative hub of all of that. So facilitating for the purposes of getting information, research, furthering enforcement, to prepping agendas. She is the absolute administrative center of everything Ansonia has going on in the land use realm. So no pressure. But Rhonda's our land use guru and director.
Yeah, it is really nice to have you on, Rhonda, because I've been a local reporter now for 102 years. And so over the years, I become a geek for like land use stuff. It's some of my favorite things to cover. So somebody like you, the average citizen might not know it, but the effect you have on people's lives is from like curb cuts to when you turn into a local shopping center goes through the planning department, whether you can put up a fence or not, all things that are governed or regulated and pass through.
Or whether or not you can have chickens.
John's in a rush. All right, we're going to get to the chickens. All right.
I'm looking for a good segue.
Yeah, there we go. So the purpose of this, if you can see at the bottom there's a public hearing scheduled for Monday, June 26th at 6:30 p.m. on Zoom, City of Ansonia, on the keeping of hens, which sounds Monty Python-esque, but it's not. This is actually, there's some changes coming possibly to the land use regulations in Ansonia, John, Mr. Corporation Counsel, regarding hens. So what the heck is this about?
So currently, right now, with chickens in general, right, you can't have chickens unless you have 3 acres. So our regulations do not permit the keeping of hens or poultry on property unless you essentially have what we classify as a farm. And this, for years and years and years, has been a topic of conversation, at the least, among residents in Ansonia. It's gone as far back as, I think, a little prior to when I was on the Board of Aldermen over a decade ago. I believe it was a family in Ansonia. I think they were the Klimas family, had brought a case all the way up to the Superior Court. So out of Ansonia and into the court system, into the Milford court system, challenging the decision of the enforcement officer that they could not keep chickens.
Oh, no kidding. I was not aware of that. Okay.
And more recently, we've had, throughout the years, we've had residents bring concerns up to us. David Rhodes, who's a popular Facebook commentator. He's one of the ones.
He's an Ansonia resident as well, Mr. Politics.
Oh, I'm just speaking from,
okay,
your likely interactions, right?
True.
But he's reached out to us, I think it was maybe 2, 3 years ago, about the possibility of changing those regulations. And we've heard from many residents, in the same vein. And then,
Just
of
people
course,
want chickens, I guess.
there's especially, I think, after COVID, there's been more and more of a growing interest of that sustainability element, right? Of maintaining your own poultry, chickens for eggs. And there's been a lot of interest. Meanwhile, there's been stories of those that went ahead and did it anyway. So stories
Locally.
about chickens on property in spite of the regulations and the enforcement issues that brings. So for a while now, PZ has been informally considering whether or not to tackle an amendment, a potential amendment. And we feel we're at a point where we want to have that conversation, that dialogue publicly. We've put together a draft regulation that would allow the keeping of hens in limited circumstances, in a situation that's more realistic for your average Ansonia homeowner. No longer a 3-acre requirement, but at least a third of an acre.
And right now, 3 acres in a residential zone, I assume there are no properties. Essentially, chickens are
Not happening.
banned.
Yep,
Okay.
not happening. And that would technically be a farm under the current regulation. So you wouldn't expect that to be the case.
So the goal of this, just to boil it down for morons like me, you're allowing chickens.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, hens.
Hens,
We
sorry.
want to make that distinction.
No roosters. I saw that on the
There are
Facebook
no
page.
roosters. There are no roosters. And, for people in Rhonda, I'm sure in the staff, they're all up on things. But for people like me that maybe didn't pay attention in biology class, roosters are not necessary for eggs. And I bring that up, I'm sure to everyone it's obvious, but probably to a select few, including myself before I started taking a look at this.
Yeah, me too.
Didn't pay attention in class and just, I just don't know what we're doing. And so we didn't understand that you don't need roosters to get eggs.
So go through this,
roosters are
John.
not
Like talk. I see right there. It says no more than 6 hens. Go through the meat, I guess, for lack of a better word. Go through the high points of this proposed ordinance.
So let's start with, the basics. It's hens, right? As opposed to roosters. The lot size is really important, at least 1/3 acre we're going to be looking at. And we're also going to be looking at no more than 6 hens on any property. And we're looking also, this is an exception that we're making for residential zones, but it's also going to be by permit. So there's still going to be a process where they have to apply for a zoning permit.
More
Because-
work for Rhonda.
Exactly.
Pardon?
Exactly.
Yes.
More work for you.
Right. And
Paperwork.
they're only single family homes too. That was part of the,
Oh, okay. Okay.
So if you have a single family home, and you believe that you'd like to entertain the hens on your property, you apply for a zoning permit to show that you're meeting the way that you're putting your arrangement together is meeting the regulations here. And so, for example, no portion of your enclosure, when you put together your enclosure for the hens, can be visible from a street line in any distance. So it's not going to be a situation where you're going to be seeing this off the city streets. We have setback requirements. So the actual activity has to occur in a fenced-in enclosure, and that fenced-in enclosure can be no more than 200 square feet in your rear yard, right? So this activity is going to be confined to that space of 200 square feet, and that fenced-in enclosure has to be at least 25 feet from the street area. It has to be 5 feet from any property line and 15 feet from any residential dwelling. And so, of course, there may be overlapping, distances there when you take into account the street and property lines, and it's going to be the larger distance that applies. But this is all about, of course, being able to conduct this operation, this use of your property with respect for your neighbors. And that's what all of these setbacks are about, to make sure that you truly have room on your property and don't take up so much space that it's going to essentially make your neighbors uncomfortable or take up too much of your relative yard. All of this is going to be provided on a plot plan. So that's going to be a requirement of your zoning application, is you're going to give a plot plan to Rhonda and her staff that shows where you're putting the coop, where you're conducting the activity relative to your property line, relative to your home. It also gives some guidelines for the structure that you're going to be housing the hens in. So the structure, for example, can't exceed 12 feet in height. and it needs to be a certain distance away, 10 feet away from any property line. So the actual structure isn't particularly close to, say, your neighbor's property line. And so it's all about a balancing act, trying to make a reasonable accommodation for residents that would like to make this use of the property, but at the same time being considerate to other residents, to their neighbors, in terms of how that use affects the overall area, their overall neighborhood.
So, and then the public hearing that's going to happen at 6:30 p.m. It's on Zoom. I don't know if I mentioned that, and if people want to get the direct link to participate in this and share your opinion, either way, it's cityofansonia.com. Look under meetings, and you'll see all the information there, including the agenda, any supporting documentation, and most importantly, the direct link to the Zoom meeting. So, yeah, so to play devil's advocate here. I live in Derby. I live on a small plot of land. There are some chickens in the area. In full disclosure, I get my eggs from a local kid who does this, and they're delicious. But the curmudgeon in me thinks like, oh man, if there are chickens, if all my neighbors and me, and we all have chickens, there's going to be rats. There's going to be more rodents. I'm going to have more bobcats, bears, and hippopotamuses coming out of the woods to eat my chickens. Does this sort of take that into consideration?
So you see in the regulation that there needs to be compliance with local and state health codes. And so absolutely it's taken into consideration. If the activity is going to result in a blighted condition and a health or safety hazard, the enforcement mechanism of our land use department will be in full swing, as it is in any typical blighted situation.
What about the Naugatuck Valley Health District? Does the NVHD get involved in inspecting any of these facilities, or propose or potential?
They could, to the extent that the situation created poses a threat to the health of residents. Then yes, they would at the very least come down to inspect and issue a report. And of course, sometimes they take action on their own, but many times they actually work with the city to take action. For example, when we have residences that are horribly blighted, horrible situations, not
an existing condition. Gotcha.
Yep.
But part of this but they won't, the NVHD isn't coming to inspect your chicken coop before it can become operational.
They are not a part of the approval process, but if a complaint is lodged, they could become a part of the enforcement process.
And that's my other question. Maybe Rhonda can answer this. In terms of the existing conditions, is this something that people complain about? Oh, my neighbor has chickens. It's freaking me out. How is it an issue in Ansonia right now? Or is it a positive thing? Is it either way?
We get complaints regularly, but the biggest complaint is a rooster. So most of the time the complaints come in, I hear a rooster in my neighborhood, go out there and find it.
And what does the city do at that point? And how will this ordinance doesn't impact that? It's got to be a tough thing to go try to find and then take someone's rooster, I would assume.
Well, we usually give them a warning, and they usually will get rid of them on their own.
Gotcha. Okay.
We haven't had anybody who didn't comply with an order to get rid of one.
And is it when you tell somebody who has, I know this is a little off topic, but when someone has a rooster and it's waking up the neighborhood, do they just say that, oh, I wasn't aware that I couldn't have this thing?
Yeah, they say they were aware that they couldn't have it, but also when you get the chickens when they're young, you don't know when you're going to have a rooster. So they all look the same when they're small, and you don't know when you have one until it starts crowing. And they don't only crow in the morning, they crow all day.
And then Rhonda, what input did you have in creating this ordinance? It's like, how does that work? I know John's the attorney, but was this something where you huddled together with Dennis Elder? Is it Dennis Elder? Why am I?
Yeah,
I'm getting my planners. I'm thinking of the guy in Danbury 100 years ago. I'm sorry. It's Friday.
Yeah, Dave and I went back and forth on this. We had worked in another town that allowed chickens, so we kind of looked at their regs and what they did. Of course, it was more rural than it is here. But I have chickens myself, so I had some input on what we should do and shouldn't do.
Oh, that's great. Okay, so there's some firsthand knowledge there.
Yeah, I mean, they're not easy to keep.
We also took a look at some,
I can barely handle my cat. I'm sorry, John, go ahead.
We took a look at our neighboring communities as well. For example, Seymour had gone through a recent enforcement issue regarding livestock, roosters and hens. And of course, Seymour, the parcels are a little bit larger and they allow a bit more. But we sort of used those experiences also to kind of shape what our regulation could look like, anticipating things like, hey, someone that gets a rooster and doesn't quite know it until it's too late. But I would say that we're very happy that most of these situations are resolved simply by working with the residents, and that's really the goal. Ultimately, the city does have the authority to issue fines and go to court if someone is really refusing to comply with the law. However, again, that's not been our experience with most of these land use issues, from blight to a rooster. Usually residents are looking to work with the town and do have respect for what these uses, how these uses affect their neighbors and the problems that could cause.
And that was the first time I took a look at the proposed, it's not an ordinance, it's a zoning text change, or is text amendment, is that right?
It's a regulation, and it's done by text amendment.
Okay,
Not an
gotcha.
ordinance. So this is not through the Board of Aldermen. It's not part of the city.
Hey, I keep saying
code
ordinance or keep thinking that. Okay, gotcha. It's not a law per se, it's regulation, land use regulation. Will this impact because I was looking at, okay, you need to be a certain amount. There's a setback from the road. There's a setback from your neighbor's property. There's a setback from your house. In terms of properties that qualify, is this just the hilltop that will have enough room in their properties to do chickens, or is it anticipated can be done anywhere?
There's properties all over the city that are going to be eligible. Obviously, areas with larger yards, right, are going to be more likely to be more eligible zones. I'd also say, right, that this is not set in stone. So the reason why we're having the public hearing is to start getting an idea from the public, positive or negative, and the particulars as well. We're very interested to hear, is a third of an acre not enough, right? Should it be expanding the scope? Or are we going to get residents saying, hey, even that's too much? That's not taking account, the cleanliness standards, the possible noise hazards. So we really want to start that dialogue with the public and hear what they have to say. This regulation may very well change substantially based on the input. And we very much want input. This is not set on a course where, hey, we're looking to get this approved next week. This is, we want to be very cautious about this because it is something that can impact quality of life. Positive for those tending to the hens, but negative possibly for those in tight quarters if the regulation isn't done right. So we really want to get a sense of what residents are thinking, both those that want hens and and also from those that are worried about what their neighbors' use of the property could mean for them. So we really want that dialogue. We want that conversation. We want the input.
And that's why people should attend the Zoom meeting 6:30 p.m. All you do is give your name and address and get there on time and speak at the start of the meeting to be officially entered onto the record. How much will this cost? Like first of all, that looking at all the regulation, just to get a coop is more involved than I would have thought. What about the permit? How much is that going to cost people to come in and get my chicken permit or my hen keeping permit?
So everything is under one umbrella. So it would be the coop, the chickens, everything is $140.
$140. Okay, great. All right, those are all my questions. I don't know, as I've never written a story about hen keeping before. I'll admit to that. Maybe there are things that I'm not asking you that you want to mention as important, either John or Rhonda.
I mean, at this stage, again, I think it's about hearing from the public and going from there. Really, we're kind of writing regulations in a sense in the dark in terms of, we hear from certain residents, but those are the residents that are really going to want the hens, or they're the residents that are really upset that they're hearing a rooster crowing, right? So we want to hear from everybody in between at this point. Is this a positive thing, a negative thing, something we want, something we don't want? So that's really where the ball is right now. The ball's in the public's court right now. But
I saw 70 comments on the City of Ansonia Facebook page where the city was saying, hey, this is coming up. So there is interest in this, apparently. I never would have guessed it. I sat at a couple of those P&Z meetings and I just took a nap when it came to keeping of the hens. Shows you how much I know. I should have been paying attention. All right, that's my bad joke to end the broadcast. That's what I end. I end strong. That's it, guys.
That's it.
And ladies.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rhonda.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Rhonda. I appreciate it.